Hello, I'm Anna Maria Tremonti, and you're listening to The Current. Still to come, remembering Joe Schlesinger. As a CBC News foreign correspondent for decades, he brought Canadians world-changing events. He did it with a sense of history and by bringing the biggest stories down to a human scale with a heartbeat. He joined me here on The Current for a wide-ranging talk about his life and his career a decade ago, and we'll revisit that conversation in half an hour. But first, when the heartbeat is data to be crunched. When we think of cardiac arrest, it's almost always something that comes out of the blue. But what if you could have a 5-minute warning? That could be enough to save a life. And using advances in artificial intelligence, that is becoming increasingly possible. At Toronto's Hospital for Sick Children, some of the vast amount of medical data generated each and every minute is being gathered together and analyzed in an important new way. Anna Goldenberg has helped pioneer this technique using artificial intelligence. She is the first Varma Family Chair of Biomedical Informatics and Artificial Intelligence at Sick Kids Hospital, and she's with me in Toronto. Hello.
Hi.
A computer model for predicting cardiac arrest in infants. Explain to me how that works.
We are seeing a lot of signal right now. A lot of physiological signal is being measured and recorded, and clinicians, doctors, and nurses have to kind of monitor it, understand all these multiple signals at the same time to try to see how to react to it. Maybe an intervention is needed, and the more data we collect, the harder it is to make instantaneous decisions based on that data, because it becomes more and more complex. So that's why we partnered with Peter Lawson and J.M. Maswi, who are in a critical care unit, where we are trying to take that data and make a risk prediction model. So we are monitoring these physiological signals. We are moving with a moving window and asking the question, is the cardiac arrest likely to happen in the next 5 minutes? And using currently available deep learning and machine learning tools, we have developed a model that actually is able to do that for 70% of the individuals in the data that we have seen so far.
Okay, so normally you would be monitoring their conditions, a doctor would be, and making those decisions, but now you can actually look at that against a whole bunch of other data to help decide. Is that
right? So we are using more of the historical data to help to make a prediction.
So in the case of cardiac arrest, you have children monitored, like wired up and being monitored, and so that data doesn't just disappear. Then it goes into something that the algorithm can use, and you can figure out long term.
That's correct.
Okay. So how would a doctor with a patient who is in that unit use the information from AI and machine learning to help that individual child?
So this is what we are trying to explore. Right now, a lot of the research in machine learning, it just remains on papers, right? We create a new model, we publish it, and we are done. And what we are trying to do at Sick Kids is trying to bring that power into the hospital. So what kind of information would be most relevant to the clinician at that moment to make a corresponding decision about potentially which intervention to make or just whether to make an intervention.
And just remind us, what difference can that 5-minute lead time make?
This question is really for the clinicians rather than an AI expert. But from what I understand, in some cases, 5 minutes are enough to make an intervention, and interventions could be anywhere from particular medication that is given to specific procedures that they would do to prevent cardiac arrest. In some cases, 5 minutes might not be enough, so we are working on a model that is able to predict even more in advance for some of the individuals, maybe not all of them.
Okay, and so that's one of the big projects you're working on. What other ways will you be using AI in medicine at the hospitals with this research chair that you have?
So I'm hoping that we will be using AI or machine learning is what I do in a great variety of ways. Right now, our emergency department has implemented an AI system which helps them to streamline and optimize the operation to get the right people at the right times to help speed up the processes in the emergency department. There are other ways where we are trying to use imaging data to help predict whether a nodule, a thyroid nodule, is likely to be malignant, to help clinicians to make a decision about whether surgery should be done. In every case, we are hoping that this will be additional information that the clinicians will use to make their decision as opposed to making a decision for them. We are not aiming to do that. What we are aiming is to really say we have this wealth of information of the patients that we have observed in the past, and based on all of that knowledge, we can deduce some patterns that may be useful for the clinician to make a decision for this specific patient.
So in the case of thyroid cancers, right,
Yes.
then the ability to spot a malignancy without surgery.
So we can predict the likelihood of it being malignant. So in thyroid cancer, unfortunately, the diagnosis itself can only happen upon resection. So there are various tests that are done. Ultrasound is done to estimate some likelihood of it being malignant, and then if the chances are high, then they do biopsy, but they won't know whether it is really cancer until resection. And of course, resection is a very invasive procedure which affects patients sometimes during their whole life following this procedure. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to say we've seen ultrasounds and we've seen biopsies for a lot of the individuals. Can we map that information to whether or not the nodule was observed to be malignant for all these other patients, and build a system which will be able to detect those patterns and say, yes, it's likely to be malignant in this case or not.
Okay. How accurate would the predictions be made through AI?
It really depends on a case-by-case basis. So in some cases we can predict it with very high accuracy. In some cases we can predict only with 70 to 80% accuracy. And all of this information will need to be communicated to the clinician to say, yes, we have a prediction for you, but this is the confidence for this prediction.
Am I right then in understanding, I mean, right now, when it comes to diagnosis, doctors might confer with each other, and they use the benefit of their own collective knowledge. What you're really talking about is enhancing that knowledge and collecting even more knowledge that would be available then.
That's correct. That's our goal, is to really try to distill a lot of the knowledge that is currently in the records and is not really being used. I would guess a parallel could be drawn to how there's a more junior clinician who gets information from theory from their studies at the university, and a much more senior clinician who has seen a lot of different cases in their life, and maybe a lot of them that they weren't learning at school about. But in our case, we would be able to provide both junior and more senior clinicians with even more information across all the clinicians that have seen patients with these conditions. So it's like having a little bit of an expert on the side.
So when you're putting all this data in, and no one necessarily knows how the AI will interpret for any specific case, right?
Yes, so we are working on that. This ties to the black box of AI. Kind of everybody's saying, well, AI is a black box and we shouldn't be using it because we don't understand how it works. And the reality is a bit more complicated. First of all, there's a great initiative within AI to interpret models. So that's one of the things. Another thing is that